Okay, I apologize for the two abortive attempts at live streaming. This is one of the downsides of live streaming from home. Got an important piece of mail, but putting that aside, hopefully I'm going to use the remainder of this video to talk about the Robert Mueller report and the lack of shame among the journalistic establishment about the fact that the very thing they've been hyping for over a year has year and a half, close to 2 years really, has really nothing has come of it. And I just like to recommend you all read a piece by Matt Taibbi. It's actually an excerpt from a larger book with some additional elements. Now that the Mueller report is out, he actually added his analysis of the release of the report to this. But it's titled the Mueller report is, I think it's called the Mueller report is this generation's WMD, or our journalist WMD basically. And I agree with this assessment. It's been exposed as the biggest, most sustained and consistently erroneous set of reporting that's occurred since the lead up to the Iraq War, and speculation that Saddam Hussein was had possession of chemical, biological, nuclear weapons that he was prepared to use against the United States. Now, I came across an interesting response to a Michael Tracy tweet, and I don't like to spend a lot of time speculating or analyzing Twitter, because it is just basically a navel-gazing, pathetic. It's basically a hive for journalists to navel gaze and obsess over things that do not exist, and to embroider and lie about things that do not exist. Things like Russia Trump collusion. But there was an interesting tweet storm by Michael Tracy about how embarrassing this should be for the media, if the media had any shame whatsoever, which they don't. And one of my Facebook friends pushed back a little when this is a left libertarian that I know who's very consistently anti-war, and she pushed back against the notion that these two things were comparable, when Michael Tracy, like Matt Taibbi, said that this is the 2019 version of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. And she pushed back a little and said, well, this isn't really that, it's not as important. And it's true. You can't underestimate the damage that the Iraq War inflicted, not only on the participants, the men and women that were sent there under false pretenses, under erroneous pretenses, whose justification for being there really didn't exist, and who subsequently experienced the trauma, the mental and emotional and physical trauma, even excluding the people that the servicemen and women that were killed, having to rebuild their lives after Iraq, plus the civilians that were killed, and the fact that the Iraq War was the genesis for Al Qaeda in Iraq, i.e., ISIS, i.e., the Islamic State. That that group would not exist were it not for the Iraq War. It took a small terrorist group that existed on the outskirts of Kurdistan at the beginning of the before the war, and turned it into this multinational, incredibly incredibly powerful jihadist network that rivaled Al Qaeda proper, headed by Osama bin Laden at the time. So it essentially was the seedbed for ISIS, which we didn't push out of its strongholds in Iraq and Syria until this past week. They lost their last major cantonment in Syria. Plus, all of the displacement of Christians who were the heart of the Middle East before the Islamic conquest. The displacement of Christians and persecution of Yazidis, all of whom were, regardless of what you think of Saddam Hussein as an authoritarian dictator, at least were able to preserve their way of life before the Iraq War happened. And it also set the table for Barack Obama being elected and future, even more equally catastrophic foreign interventions like the attack on Libya, the fact that there are slave markets now in Tripoli, and Europe is overrun by hordes of Muslim quote unquote refugees, i.e., invaders. That was something that happened because of Libya, and by implication, because of Iraq, because the Samantha Power, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice trio, the Valkyries that pushed the Libyan war, would not have been empowered were there no Iraq. It's hard to predict how political events would have unfolded, but a lot of the misery that we experience today, and a lot of the seemingly futile military endeavors, are an extension of the Iraq War. So it's hard to underestimate the catastrophe that is the Iraq War. That being said, to say that this is not the equivalent in terms of journalistic malfeasance is simply wrong. You have a group of journalists, people who are supposed to report theoretically in an idealized environment which does not exist. They're supposed to report factually correct information. They're supposed to gather facts and evidence and then present it to the American public. What happened here was they arrived at a predetermined outcome, even assuming that they were sincere and that they're simply delusional partisans that believed Trump had colluded with Russia. And I think there is an element of sincerity, in the sense that these people are so warped that they believe that Hillary Clinton, one of the most unpopular presidential nominee of a major party, in history. I mean, it's almost in history. It's hard to go back. There's some horribly unpopular nominees, but she was right up there. One of the most unpopular nominees in history, a devout warmonger, a woman who is married to one of the most corrupt, horribly corrupt, um, depraved people ever to be president, and covered up for him throughout his 8 years in office. Someone who it's hard to it's hard to it's hard to describe the unpalatability of Hillary Clinton, but these journalists thought that she was a done deal, that she was going to be president, and that's it's entirely possible that this led them to believe that Trump was actually doing the was actually was actually a puppet of Vladimir Putin, as insane as that would appear to any rational human being. There were certainly journalists who thought that sincerely, but another possibility, and I think this applies to a lot of the mainstream media, is that they knew that this was fraudulent from the get-go, just like some of the supporters of the WMD claims knew it was fraudulent from the get-go, even though there were many people pushing that narrative who believed it. A lot of them realized that it was a complete fraud from the get-go, but simply pursued it because it served their interests. And I think that's the case here as well. There are a lot of people that knew it was a fraud from the beginning, and you can appreciate that when you listen to the ex post facto justification for this waste of millions of dollars and enormous resources and critical undermining of the notion of law, the idea that you're innocent until proven guilty has been thrown under the bus and publicly celebrated. And you understand this when you listen to the after the fact rationalizations for this pathetic waste of everyone's time and a pathetic waste of taxpayer resources. And this is embodied in the opening segment of the Brian Lehrer show. Now, I don't know how many of you who watch me are from New York City, but he's the host of a program on WNYC at 10 a.m., which is essentially spoon feeding easily digestible bits of progressive dogma to people who listen to NPR, to make them think that they're more intellectually curious than they actually are, that they're not just being spoon-fed bits of propaganda. That's basically his purpose in life. And today his show opened with a long preamble to a discussion about the Mueller report, which basically lied about Trump, basically repeated the lies that every one of your leftist friends or acquaintances or coworkers has regurgitated ad nauseum from the day of his inauguration, namely that he accused all Mexicans of being rapists, that he's a misogynist, that he is a racist because he has the same views on immigration enforcement that Bill Clinton did in the mid 1990s. Essentially just the same very trite, easily refuted canards that the anti-Trump that fuse the anti-Trump movement. And he basically repeated all these as a way of justifying this ridiculous investigation, saying, "Well, it was never about collusion. We didn't even care about collusion. This was just a way of um, validating the feelings of people who hated Trump because they have this um, twisted notion that he's some sort of crypto racist fascist um, aspirant to head a Fourth Reich." And it begs the question, then what was the point? If there was no, if none of this mattered, if this was just a way of um, validating your idiotic presup your idiotic suppositions about the president, then why was Robert Mueller necessary in the first place? I mean, it didn't validate your opinions. It only did so in your own mind. But if that was the case, why was any of this necessary? And of course, he brought in a reporter from the Washington Post, which has been pushing this lie consistently for the past 2 years. A quote unquote news reporter, someone from hard news, i.e., just propaganda, but also someone who, I'm not joking, covers the identity politics beat. There's a beat, of course, there is at the Washington Post covering identity politics. In other words, grievances from people who think that the fact that they haven't succeeded in life is the responsibility of evil white men. So they're already shifting the narrative now that their narrative has been completely debunked and they've been exposed as the buffoons that they are. They're shifting the narrative to basically they're going back to an oldie in the sense of trumpet, big, bad, blumph, orange man is racist. And that's probably what they're going to be doing for the next uh, for the next year and a half. This is what they're going to be focusing on: how Trump is evil and racist, and how the next biracial female pro infanticide district attorney is going to make it all better. This idea that Trump is some sort of aberration, that we all naturally agree with the demented agenda of the demented progressive agenda that's been foisted on us, and that there's no dissent. It's simply Russian brainwashing. I think they're just going to keep on this train until it comes off the rails.